Hello. How is everyone? Let me adjust my camera. Hi. Hi. How are you? I am Aimee of AimeeRaupp.com, and it is another book club week. So every last Thursday of the month, we do book club. As many of you know, but some of you do not know, I have written 4 books over the last decade or so, 12 years. My first book is called Chill Out and Get Healthy. It is a guide for women on overall optimizing their health, their vitality. And then my second book is Yes, You Can Get Pregnant, which many of you know, came out in 2014. Chill Out and Get Healthy came out in 2010. And then in 2017, I wrote this puppy, Body Belief, which is all about how to heal autoimmune diseases, radically shift your health, and learn to love your body more. And someone who will remain nameless wrote on this book, as you can tell. And this book was inspired by writing Yes, You Can Get Pregnant and looking at the research on fertility challenges and all these unexplained fertility challenges, and also my clinical experience, right? I've been clinically seeing patients for almost 20 years at this point. And prior to that, I did research science. I have a biology and chemistry degree. I have an almost master's in neuroscience, and putting the pieces together in the research that really pointed us in the direction that many fertility challenges are actually the result of undiagnosed and or mismanaged autoimmune conditions and or inflammatory conditions, which that all sounds really confusing, but basically either inflammation or autoimmunity are triggering the immune system to not allow your body to get and or stay pregnant, or to compromise your egg quality, or to put your body into a state of survival mode where fertility and pregnancy will not be the priority. And so I wanted this book to fully be an autoimmune fertility book, but that's not what my publisher wanted. They wanted more of a general autoimmune book written for women, because the truth is that women are far more affected by autoimmunity, 75% more than men, and women in their prime, their fertile years, their mid-20s to mid to late 40s, are very impacted by autoimmunity. And so if you sit and you look at the stats and you look at the information, it's fairly easy to put it together that a lot of unexplained infertility is actually due to autoimmunity and or inflammatory conditions. And what I find clinically is when I treat inflammatory conditions such as endometriosis as if it is an autoimmune condition, which maybe this all sounds really puzzling. If it's puzzling, this is the book for you to read. Also, Egg Quality Diet is really based on the information that I discovered in writing this book. And then what I started to see clinically, so Egg Quality Diet is my most recent book. It's a year old, came out last year. What I started to see clinically was more of an autoimmune, anti-inflammatory approach to treating fertility, and how radical it was. And I learned that from writing this book. So it's, every one of my books is like me learning more and then sharing with you. What I'm also very proud of is my recommendations have remained the same for 12 years. Still the core recommendations of what to eat, what not to eat, how to treat your body, all of that has stayed the same. I've never once been like, be a vegetarian now, don't be a vegetarian, or don't eat meat, eat meat. I've always been really tried and true to my grounding principles, which are based in science and in Chinese medicine. And so anyway, Body Belief, last month we did the introduction. And now this month we are on chapter 1 in this book. So if you guys have your books, go get your copies. If not, and you're maybe kind of interested in this topic, listen, see if it intrigues you, and you can get this book on Amazon or probably anywhere books are sold. It is no longer in hardback like it is here. It's in paperback now. But yeah, I love this book. I love the cover too. It's so pretty. And yeah, some nice endorsements on this book too, if I might say so myself. Okay, so chapter 1 in Body Belief is called Autoimmunity, a Hostile Takeover of Your Body. And so let's kind of break that down. Sorry, I want you guys on Facebook to be able to see the book. Instagram, you can see it just fine. So I'm just going to read a little bit because I think that's a good way to intro us to the topic. And you guys are welcome to ask questions around autoimmunity and what I talk about in this book. If that is something, oh, I see someone already posted a question. That's great. This is not a request to join me live. That's not my fertility hot seat. That happens every other Monday. And it did just happen, right, on Monday? So in 2 weeks, I'll be back, or 10 days. So autoimmune disease is a case of misidentification. It's basically an identity crisis at the cellular level. The manifestation of cellular hostility. So basically, the cells in your body are hostile. They're hosting an attack. They are unhappy. They are inflamed. It's a good way to think of it. And the hostility is outweighing the kindness. The bad is outweighing the good. And that's not what we want. We cannot promise a cure of autoimmune diseases. No one can. No one can. Don't anyone ever listen to anyone who says they can cure an autoimmune disease. You can heal. You can regulate the immune system. You can heal the gut. You can reduce inflammation. You can lower that cellular hostility, right? And the body can become a more peaceful environment. So that's a lot of what I see when I'm dealing, with women and their fertility challenges is cellular hostility or cellular inflammation, and more inflammation than not. And so my goal is not no inflammation. That's actually unhealthy for us. We all need a little inflammation to actually function and survive. But when the inflammation is so much that the body is in fight or flight, it is not an environment for pregnancy. It is not an environment for healthy eggs. It is not an environment for uterine hospitality. It is not an environment for pregnancy and staying pregnant, because the body basically has bigger fish to fry. It's got more it's got to focus on. It's just surviving. It's not thriving, right? There's two different pathways that we get to choose on a regular basis. Not we, but we as well. But that our bodies choose based on kind of our environment. And our environment can be our emotional state as well, but also, of course, our diet and exposures to chemicals and toxins. Whether it's just surviving every day, fight or flight, or does it get to go into relax and reproduce? Two different pathways. And so my goal with all of my clients, my team's goal with all of our clients that we treat all over the world and in our clinics in the tri-state area, is to be in the rest, relax, reproduce mode more than we're in the fight or flight mode. So to be in cellular kindness more than we're in cellular hostility. It's not about eradicating cellular hostility. It's just not possible. And you don't want it, because then you would have no immune system, and anything that came by you would get sick with right away, right? So it's really about finding the balance. As my spiritual teacher says, it's not about being happy all the time to manifest the life of your dreams. It's like a 60-40, 70-30 rule. So that's really my goal, right? If I can get you into a space of 70% cellular kindness and 30% cellular hostility, we're winning, and chances are fertility will kick into gear. So keep that in mind. So as I was saying, it's basically an identity crisis at the cellular level, the manifestation of cellular hostility outweighing cellular kindness. Sure, there are a lot of moving parts and a ton of cellular cues that need to happen before your body shows signs of autoimmunity. But in very simple layman's terms, it's a hostile takeover. One that is affecting you and millions of other women. So I've already thrown out some stats, but I think these are some interesting things to think about. The American Autoimmune Related Disease Association estimates that 30 million, and this is just America, American women have at least one diagnosed autoimmune condition. Worse, many women who are walking around feeling unwell, right? I went over the symptoms in the last book club, so 4 weeks ago. Feeling unwell and are completely unaware that they may have an autoimmune diseases. For example, it is estimated that only 5% of those who suffer with celiac disease, which is the gluten allergy, have actually been diagnosed with it. Only 5% of those who actually suffer. So 95% of people who have celiac do not have a diagnosis. I don't know how that's possible when it's a very adverse reaction if you eat gluten and you have celiac. So meaning there are scores of people walking around with an inability to digest gluten and they don't even know it. That the whys and hows of autoimmune disease are still a bit of a mystery to the Western medical community. So there are more than 100 confirmed autoimmune conditions, and they present as a collection of vague symptoms. Many medical practitioners misdiagnose them or don't diagnose them at all. So here's a typical scenario, and this is like what I see in my clinic, right? I ran a circle last night at Rejuvenating Fertility Center in Westport, and one of the women was telling us that she's now on her 4th fertility clinic. She's now with RFC, Rejuvenating Fertility Center in Westport, and prior she was with a few other clinics, and that not until recently has anyone treated or even diagnosed her thyroid condition. Which in my head, like, just it like, to say it like my feathers go, like, it enrages me to hear that. This woman has spent probably 30 grand on IVF and no one fucking treated her thyroid. Like, what? How is that possible? How is that not medical malpractice, in my opinion? Because if your thyroid isn't functioning properly, if your thyroid isn't treated, you are not going to get good results with IVF. And you're not going to get pregnant naturally, actually, either. Or if you do, you're going to miscarry. Why had nobody treated her thyroid? Why had nobody actually looked at the labs that they ran on her? They ran labs. We saw the TSH was high. We saw she had thyroid antibodies. No one fucking did anything about it. Can you see? This is why I had to write these books, because it's like, whoo, God, it drives me insane. So this is a typical scenario, and a lot of these women wind up in my clinic because the Western medical system, as amazing as it is, I'm a huge fan of Western medicine, falls short. And I don't think it's the doctor's fault per se. It's more the way the system is run, because they don't have enough time with their patients to really understand. I get luxuriously my first appointment, and any of my team, our first appointment is like a solid 60 to 90 minutes talking to you about your body, all the symptoms, collecting all the information, looking at the lab work, going over all the things. Most medical doctors get about 22 minutes, I think, with a patient, some even less, depending on how many they're seeing. They don't have enough time to collect all the data. And a lot of these women that are dealing with these like autoimmune type conditions, the symptoms are vague. So they come in, they say, I'm exhausted. This is a typical scenario. I'm exhausted. My body hurts in places it never did before. I have dark circles under my eyes. My hormones are totally out of whack. I'm trying to conceive. I'm not getting pregnant. And it's only getting worse. You visit your doctor. They do some blood work where everything comes back in with normal parameters. Now remember, a thyroid is a perfect example. TSH, a normal parameter, could go up to a 4. But guess what? You can't get and stay pregnant unless your TSH is below a 2.5. Some girls maybe a 2.8, fine. Some girls, like, ideal though, we want it between a 1 and a 2.5. We want free T3 and free T4 right smack in the middle of the range. We want thyroid antibodies, if they're there, not in the high hundreds or thousands, low. That tells me there's autoimmunity going on, right? We want to know, is autoimmunity going on? So you might say to me when you come in, oh, no, my doctor checked my thyroid. Yep, no, everything's fine. Everything's fine. Can I see the lab work? Or my doctor checked my vitamin D. No, I'm in normal range. Can I see the lab work? And then I look and it's a 3.7. Not a fertile thyroid. Oh, and your D, oh, it's a 38. Yep, I want it between a 50 and a 70. So normal parameters versus functional parameters, really dramatically different. I have a lot of tests and lab work and stuff like that in the back of this book that you guys can refer to. I also have it in Yes, You Can Get Pregnant. I also have it as a resource that goes with the Egg Quality Diet book. So many places I have this information for all of you. So you visit your doctor, they do some blood work, everything comes back normal. Your doctor tells you nothing is wrong with you. Nothing's wrong with you. Bad luck, right? You know how often I see that? Oh, 3 miscarriages? Oh, bad luck. Bullshit. Not bad luck. Bullshit. Someone needs to do more testing, right? Bullshit. It's not bad luck. That's really what got me obsessed with autoimmunity and inflammatory disorders was this habitual miscarriage, recurrent pregnancy loss, women that are having more than one loss without a live birth in between, and doctors are telling them it's bad luck or all their eggs are bad, even if they're 32. Whew, another thing that gets my feathers all ruffled. So you drag on, you move through your day feeling more exhausted, your whole body aches, your head feels like it's in a fog. You see another doctor, the same thing. Next, you see a specialist, same thing. All lab tests are normal, even though you feel worse. You're depressed, headaches, pain, infertility, miscarriages. Do you know that the average autoimmune patient sees 6 different doctors on an average of 5 years before receiving a diagnosis? 6 doctors over 5 years before getting an actual diagnosis. I know some of you can raise your hand to that. 45% of patients with severe autoimmune conditions like celiac, scleroderma, lupus, Hashimoto's, that's the most common one I see. Celiac and Hashis are the most common for me. Crohn's have a very difficult time getting a diagnosis and are often labeled medically as hypochondriacs. How sad is that? So, but doesn't stop there. Once you do get a diagnosis, then what? There's not a lot of options. Biologics, steroids, anti-inflammatories. So that's it. And then here's another interesting statistic. The incidence of autoimmune illnesses continues to rise. Since the 1980s, it has tripled and affects women 75% more than men. So what is autoimmunity? I think we should break it down because I think it's really interesting for all of you to understand. From a Western scientific standpoint, it occurs when the body's immune system begins attacking normal, healthy tissue. Your body's immune system exists to destroy, like foreign invaders, right? Pathogens, viruses, and any other potential harmful anything. Bacteria, I think I said that. So it's imperative. You need a healthy immune system. It needs to be working properly so you can survive, right? But what starts to happen in autoimmunity is, for some reason, not everybody's even sure of the actual pathomechanism, why this sets in, but for some reason, the body, will use the thyroid as an example, Hashimoto's, since it's so common, that 80% of women that have hypothyroidism actually have Hashimoto's. I have a very low grade hypothyroidism, but I'm treating it because I work with a functional medicine doctor who likes me to be smack dab in the middle of the range, right? I don't have antibodies, which is rare. Most women have antibodies that have hypothyroidism. They have 80% of women. So Hashimoto's is autoimmune thyroid disease that usually presents as hypo. Sometimes it goes back and forth between hyper and hypo. So your TSH is really low or it's really high. And then you have thyroid antibodies. So whenever I recommend getting blood work done for your thyroid, you get a complete thyroid panel that includes TSH, free T3, free T4, and your thyroid antibodies. Don't take no for an answer, please. But in the case of Hashimoto's, what happens is your body creates antibodies to the thyroid gland, which is right here. And so all of a sudden, for unknown reasons, your body starts attacking its own tissue, a gland that it's lived with since conception. Well, since the thyroid formed, in conception or in utero. And then all of a sudden now in your 30s, your body decides, oh, I'm going to start creating antibodies to this guy. I'm going to start attacking my own tissue. And that is what an autoimmune disease is. So in rheumatoid arthritis, it starts attacking joints. In scleroderma, it starts attacking organs. They can actually harden the organs. And these are organs that we've been with our entire life. And so why does this turn on? It's a real, misunderstood piece. And so that's why we don't really also understand how to best treat it, which is why I do think people in my world, the more alternative world, we do better with conditions like this because we can come at it with diet and supplements. And again, we're not curing autoimmunity, but we can help people learn to live with it, manage it, get it under control, get their body out of fight or flight and out of hostility and into kindness and into rest, relax, and reproduce. So any number of things can go awry. Your immune system no longer differentiates itself. It starts assaulting every cell or protein in your body. And in autoimmunity, your immune system is working perfectly fine. So some people will be like, oh, my immune system's like hyperactive. That's actually not true. The immune system's working perfectly fine. It's cellular misidentification. There's actually like a misidentification going on. And now the immune system is just attacking something that it thinks is a pathogen that never was a pathogen in the past. That's what's going on there. The miscommunication leads to whole body inflammation, which triggers autoimmunity, which in turn triggers other physical symptoms. And then what is inflammation? I think that's another thing to really importantly identify, because autoimmunity and inflammation are different. One definitely, they both can feed each other. They're like, I think they're kind of circular, or like the yin and the yang, if you will. And inflammation isn't always a bad thing. So I know everybody, and including myself, I wrote a whole book, The Egg Quality Diet. It's an anti-inflammatory diet, right? Inflammation isn't always a bad thing, right? We need it. Say we get a splinter. Our body, say we get a bug bite, or an infection. Our body, we need an inflammatory response to actually protect us to heal. So the reaction takes place, say the splinter. When it enters your finger, your body was alerted, foreign invader, it sends out the immune cells, everybody comes in to support itself, we're going to heal. So we want our bodies to do this, right? This is normal, this is what we want. But inflammation in these acute situations facilitates healing, but it gets troublesome when it's chronic, when it happens all the time, as in the case when the body is constantly under attack from foreign invaders, psychological stress, lack of sleep, poor diet, and or environmental toxins. And so I do break it down in the book, but people ask me, like, what is it you think is at the root of autoimmunity? Why is it so on the rise? Why, since the 80s, has it tripled and it's affecting women more than men? Any guesses? Environmental toxins. Since the 80s, we've introduced over 100 chemicals into our environment. Most all of them are considered endocrine disrupting chemicals, which means they disrupt our hormones. Women have a more, what's the word I want to use? A vaster, a wider hormonal profile, a more complicated hormonal profile than men. I also think women in the last, since the 80s, which is now 40 years ago, have been under a lot more psychological stress. There's a lot on us. Not only are we going and getting an education and having a kick-ass career, but then we're also building a family, and we're also, figuring out our identity, our sexuality, all of our things. And there's a lot of pressure on us that we maybe put on ourselves, that society has helped put on us. And so I do think those two things combined, environmental toxins and psychological stress, are two of the biggest culprits that are the leading cause of inflammation and or autoimmunity. And so from a Western medicine perspective, there's 3 typical reasons why autoimmunity kicks in: genetics, previous infections, and environmental toxins. So Western medicine does identify that the environmental toxins are a leading cause of autoimmunity. Not every doctor necessarily agrees with that, even though the literature, the research is very strong and it's very apparent. So you guys who follow me and maybe have read Yes You Can Get Pregnant, clear as day, I talk about bath and beauty products. They are a huge contributing factor, a huge way for us to be exposed to environmental toxins. And so something we really have to take seriously. And then going organic with our foods. And not every food needs to be organic, because not every food is sprayed with pesticides. So I also break all that down for you. But really understanding how environmental toxins are playing a role, and understanding that the literature is really strong in support of environmental toxins really do dictate and lead to inflammation, the autoimmunity inflammation circle. Genetics, of course, we might have predispositions, but remember, I always talk about this, our genetics are not set in stone. It's called epigenetics, which is how we live our life determines whether our genes turn on or turn off. So you might have had, your mother had endometriosis, or your mother had Hashimoto's, or she had lupus, or she had scleroderma. So you have a likelihood. There's a good chance that you could get it because you got the genes. They're in the mix. How you live your life determines whether or not it turns on. Hashimoto's is very rampant in my family. And I was surprised when I didn't find out that I had the antibodies. And I really think it's because I've been doing this kind of work. I've been clinically practicing for almost 20 years, 18 years this December. But ever since I wrote Chill Out and Get Healthy, which I wrote it in 2009, and my dad got diagnosed with an aggressive cancer in that same time frame, I began taking all of this extremely seriously, from the products to the foods to everything. Like, I was and still am extremely cautious with all of these toxins and the exposures. And I think that's a part of the reason why I didn't wind up with Hashimoto's. And not to say that like you created that yourself, but more that like we have these predispositions, and women really, we don't learn until we're kind of in our 30s on how to take the best care of ourselves. And so I think I was a little ahead of the game in a sense. But I also think it's fascinating. So we all do have these genetic predispositions that we're born with. And then maybe we couple that with a past infection like mono or Lyme disease. Epstein-Barr seems to be a trigger. I'm not an expert in any of that, but like do see it clinically. Candida, endometriosis. I see a very common link between girls with endometriosis and girls with Hashimoto's, as does the literature. It's very predominant to see those two things together. It's very predominant to see celiac as well in that mix. Usually you see 3 autoimmune conditions together. Endo is not an autoimmune. It's technically inflammatory, but I always say it acts like an autoimmune, and when I treat it like an autoimmune disease, it gets better. But anyway, to think about, those are the 3 main issues. So the genetic part can't change, but as you know, because of the science of epigenetics, you can influence how your genes express themselves by making different lifestyle choices. And then I get into epigenetics more in chapter 2, which we'll cover next month. But I want you to also keep in mind, this is a really interesting statistic. When it comes to your genetics, keep in mind that fewer than 10% of those individuals with an increased genetic susceptibility of autoimmune diseases actually develop the clinical disease. Only 10% of people with a susceptibility actually get the disease. That's very different than what we're told. This suggests a strong environmental trigger in the pre-autoimmune process. Environmental factors are also likely to affect the outcome of the process and the rate of progression to disease in those individuals who develop autoimmunity. This is all citations, and there's a ton of research in this book. And the history of infections, Sarah Ballantyne, who I really love her book, The Paleo Approach, she really goes into like the deep, dark science on all of this that I did not. I kept this book more layman. It's important to understand the distinction between infection contributing to the development of autoimmune and causing it. Autoimmune diseases are not caused by infectious organisms. Instead, infections increase your chances of developing specific autoimmune diseases. So basically, it's almost like you have an event that triggers an inflammatory response in your body, a chronic inflammatory response, autoimmunity sets in. That seems to be the progression. Environmental toxins. I mean, some of this is just fucking scary. So this one guy, Fred Miller, he's the director of Environmental Autoimmunity Group and National Institute of Environmental Health Sciences, states that autoimmune diseases are now recognized as among the leading causes of death among young, middle-aged women in the United States. He insists that the reasons are largely environmental, meaning our lifestyle and diet are the root cause of autoimmunity. In an article published in Environmental Health Perspectives, Dr. Miller claims our gene sequences aren't changing fast enough to account for the increases of autoimmune diseases, yet our environment is. We've got 80,000 chemicals, now it's up to 100,000, 80,000 chemicals in commerce, but we know very little about their immune effects. Our lifestyles are also different than they were a few decades ago, and we're eating more processed food. Virginia Ladd, she is the executive director of the American Autoimmune Research, with the rapid increase in autoimmune diseases, it clearly suggests that environmental factors are at play. Genes do not change in such a short period of time. So I know some of this is like beyond the scope of like what we really want to talk about, but like what I get into in the rest of this chapter is how your brain, your beliefs, and your autoimmunity. And so that there is this psychological stress component that we know is impacting and is part of these environmental toxins. And there is research, and I really get into it. There's a lot of research in the nocebo and placebo effect, but basically that our beliefs dictate our behavior dictates our health. And that also, I think the other thing I say a lot is your body hears everything your brain says. So if your thoughts are very inflammatory, that it is setting off this fight or flight cascade, which is setting off this chronicity of inflammation, which could then trigger autoimmunity. So part of healing, not curing, is working on the belief systems, which is hence the name of the book, Body Belief. Um, so I get into a lot of that too, but I think a big takeaway, the average person has 50,000 thoughts a day. 90% of them are the same. 50,000 thoughts a day, 90% of them are the same. So what is the story you're telling yourself? What is the first thought you think when you think about your body, your health, your longevity, your vitality, your disease stateness, your age? Then I go into food and autoimmunity, talking about gut health. There's a lot of research about zonulin and leaky gut and particles leaking through our digestive tract into our bloodstream where they don't belong, causing an immune response, which can also be a big trigger for autoimmunity. Intestinal permeability is what it's called instead of leaky gut, if you don't want to think about that. I talk about your world and autoimmunity. So the world you live in and how you interact with the world affects your health and ultimately your autoimmunity. It seems all luxuries of the modern world, including skincare products you use, the relationships you keep, the air you breathe, how much sleep you get, how you manage your stress, how much you work, your exercise routine, and what you are believing about your body and its wellness or illness will have major effects on your health and the manifestation of, I said of autoimmunity because the book's about autoimmunity, but I would also say about inflammation in your body. And then in here, similar to the egg quality diet, I have what we call the red flag symptom list, where you go through and you check off all the boxes. So it just is a good starting point for you. And then I get into the Chinese medicine piece of autoimmunity, which I know we're at 30 minutes, but I'm going to spend a few minutes because it's so important to me. I think I have a 1 o'clock. Let me just double check. Today. Yeah, I have a 1 o'clock. So I'll end in the next 5 minutes. So I want to explain how I was trained to view autoimmune conditions from a traditional Oriental medicine perspective. So we don't focus on what your Western diagnosis is in Chinese medicine. You come in and you tell me your symptoms, right? And I play detective and I try to figure out like what parts of the body are out of whack and who's not communicating with who, and then how can I best support you, right? So when it comes to working with autoimmune conditions, I rely solely on how the patient presents to me. And then from there, I make my diagnosis. I decide, is it qi, is it blood, is it essence, which one needs more support, is it all of the above? And we work on that. We work on restoring your body from that qi, blood, and essence perspective to restore health and therefore begin to heal the body. So Chinese medicine, there's no such thing as autoimmunity. There's no such thing as intestinal permeability, right? We look at like digestion and absorption. Like if you came into me and you said, oh, my skin is really dry and flaky, or my joints are really red, itchy, swollen, I'm going to think, okay, there's heat in this joint, but the skin's really dry, so there's a lack of nourishment. So something's wrong with the digestive system, like from a Chinese medicine perspective, right? So I kind of break it down a little bit differently. Like why is it hot here and cold here? Why is the skin cracking? Why is it red? Why is it dry? Why are they like Hashimoto's, right? If it purely Chinese medicine, I wouldn't be looking at lab work. I wouldn't know that thyroid antibodies were present. But perhaps you would tell me I have these waves of like, I feel really like hyperthyroid, so anxious, I can't sleep, my heart's racing, I'm sweating, to hypo, where I get really cold, really tired. So to me, I'm like, okay, why is she fluctuating so much between this like seemingly hot condition and this cold condition? How do I restore balance, as my teacher would say, who I study with, a mentor in Chinese medicine, to restore the right relationship in the body, basically restoring homeostasis. So Chinese medicine, and what attracted me to Chinese medicine the most, with having a strong Western medicine background, was the fact that the emotional piece was considered. Psychological stress, as we would call it, but our thoughts, our beliefs play a huge role in the manifestation and the healing of any disease state, any disharmony in your body. So, so what this means in modern day layman's terms is that all three vital substances, qi, blood, essence, that we see in Chinese medicine, which are our vital substances, are compromised in a person who shows autoimmunity. When qi, blood, and essence are deficient, the body becomes much more susceptible to the influence of the environment and its toxins. We see the biggest assaults on qi, blood, and essence as coming from overexertion, overwork, too much alcohol, smoking, recreational drugs, prescription drugs, excess sexual activity, loud music, violent movies, repressed emotions, and a lack of peace in one's life. processed foods, lack of sleep, and disconnect from nature. So obviously there's a lot of reasons, but just to give an idea of like how I approach it clinically, like also I get to look at the labs and I really understand Western medicine. I understand functional medicine, but Chinese medicine, we look at like, okay, where are you out of balance in your life? How do we get more harmony and peace in your life? And that will support that cellular kindness over that cellular hostility. So there it is, guys. Chapter 1 of Body Belief. So if any of this is intriguing or of interest to you, I highly recommend going out and getting it. You can see all of my books at aimeeraupp.com/books. And there we have it. I'm going to go and prepare for my 1 o'clock fertility coaching client, and I will see you guys later. If you're in the U.S., have a wonderful 4th of July, and I'll see you guys all next week, okay? Have a beautiful day. End this video.